The novelty of nature is embedded in the habit of nature.
Nature is almost all habit and a tiny, tiny cutting edge of novelty. That's right.
I relate that to at the subatomic particle level. In fact, that's complete novelty. Anything can happen, except it is constrained by 12 habits, the symmetry principles.
Yes, although I don't know if we want to get off into this, but since you're here, Paul, it's a good time. Are you following all this stuff about how uncertainty is really taking a beating, and people are saying that it isn't this mysterious property of nature, it's a mysterious property of Swedish quantum physicists, and that the David Bohm's formulation of the quanta is a much more elegant formulation and eliminates the uncertainty domain at the cost of introducing non-locality, which because of Bell's theorem, they're practically ready to admit. So there is this sort of wild horse movement in quantum physics to make it completely explicit and predictable and get rid of all the woo-woo that comes in with the Niels Bohr formulation.
I wasn't thinking so much of the uncertainty principle, but for example, time can reverse. There's nothing at the subatomic particle level that constrains time one way or the other, as far as I know. And so lots of things can happen, and yet there are certain habits that have evolved in the universe, which we call the laws of physics, or actually the symmetry principles.
Right.
And it seems to me that it would have to be that way. If that's what's happening at the nature level, it's reflecting something that's happening at a deeper.
Well, you came in late, but part of what we were talking about was Prigozhin and some of his new work, and one of the things he casts doubt on, or is very skeptical of, is the irreversibility principle. He says that, well, first of all, he says time is a process. It's not a concept, and that there is an arrow, which is good news for my position, because I've always felt that there was an arrow.
Is there order in disorder? I mean, I'm hearing you say order. I'm hearing you say disorder. Is there an order to the chaos enough to create it as predictable?
Chaos is the mother of order.
So it is a system, then. It is, in a sense, its own law.
Well, yeah, one of the things that I have down here to cover, but we haven't sort of steered near it, but that does it, is if we go... I mean, for a scientist, here's the real difference between what freedom and law means and what novelty and habit means. The way science has been done since Newton is through probability theory. You get this with Cantor and these people. Probability theory is a very, very necessary tool for science, but it may be a bogus assumption about nature. Let's think about probability theory for a moment. Here's how it works. You want to know how much electricity is flowing through a wire. You carry out 1,000 measurements. You add them together. You divide by 1,000. You now say, this is how much electricity is flowing through the line. Well, but it's entirely possible that if you look back through the 1,000 measurements you made, not one will be the same as this average value, which you're now holding up and saying is how much electricity is flowing through the line. Not one of your measurements confirms your final conclusion. But people say, well, but, induction and accumulation of sample and averaging. Averaging is what's going on here at the center. And the key to using averaging with intellectual effectiveness is you're making an assumption that's very deep. And the assumption you're making is that time is invariant. Well, that is simply an assumption. It is the centrally untested assumption of science over the past 500 years. Now, let's take something really important.
I'm making with you to say that this is the amount of electricity that's flowing through this particular point in time.
Well, but the whole notion of science is not that we attain states of intellectual consensus, but that we have a true reflection of the phenomenon. So then here's a case where this becomes more important: the speed of light. The speed of light in the general and special theory of relativity is specified to be a constant. So, since 1908, the speed of light has been measured on this one planet with various devices. Not once has any device ever gotten a value exactly congruent with any other device. Never. Well, so then they rush forward, very flustered that you would even mention this embarrassment. And they say, well, you don't understand. It's the limit of the instrumentality. Well, but wait a minute. This is just a phrase some weasel lawyer scientist put together to explain why they weren't getting the right value. Because they're saying, okay, we're measuring the speed of light. Now, we're within 30 meters per second of where it was yesterday, or this measurement is only off by 20 meters per second, 1 part in billions. But the point is, you're not getting the same measurement that you got yesterday. And so why are you saying that the speed of light is constant? Well, because the entire theory of relativity falls to pieces if you ever yield on that principle. And so then a person who was trying to do what in science is called save the phenomenon would say, well, let's plot the speed of light and see how much it's varying. Well, now, if it is in fact what is called the limit of the instrumentality that is causing this problem, then do we all agree that the values should cluster around a mean? In other words, this guy is 30 meters too fast. This guy in Australia, he gets 30 meters too slow. This person is 70 meters too fast. Right? The values would cluster. Right. But what do we actually see when we examine these variations in the speed of light? We see that from 1908 until 1975, and I'll explain why, 1975, from 1908 to 1975, the speed of light has apparently slightly increased. The values are not staying constant. They're drifting slightly upward. Well, we are on one tiny planet in one very narrow slice of time, and yet we, having measured the speed of light to be sliding slowly toward faster and faster, have created a physics based on the assumption that it's a universal constant and never changes. Weird. Completely in contravention to the stated methods of science. Well, then what happens in 1972? They hold a conference in Geneva, and everybody lays their cards out on the table, and they say, look, this is just a pain, this whole business about the speed of light. From now on, the International Geophysical Union will define the speed of light. And nobody should go and measure it. Don't do that. If you want to know the speed of light, flip open your handbook of physical constants, and we, the International Physical Union, have decreed that this is the speed of light. Weird. And, we could go on with similar examples. Melting points. When a